Imagine waking up in a cold place near a river. You're wrapped in a rough wool blanket that smells like a wet animal. It's still dark outside, and you're confused about where you are. Ice covers your boots, and the air is freezing. Suddenly, you hear a snorting sound very close to your head. It's your horse. This animal is not just for riding. It also keeps you warm, shares your sleeping space, and sometimes becomes food. Personal space doesn't exist here. As you get up, your horse steps on your coat. He doesn't apologize. Mongol horses never do. Round you, the camp is already busy. No one talks. They just get on their horses and ride off without a word. A boy about 10 years old rides past you, yawning. His bow is as long as he is tall. He's been riding longer than you've probably been alive. You grab your gear, tighten your belt, and climb onto your horse. There's no ceremony, no thank you prayers, not even breakfast. You chew some dry meat while riding. If your jaw isn't strong now, it will be soon if you live long enough. The wind is cruel. It doesn't just blow its slices. You ride straight into it. Your face is numb before you cross 3 hills. No one asks if you're okay. This is life on the steppe. You either keep riding, or you're left behind. By midday, you've changed horses twice. Not because you're tired, your horse is. In this world, you're supposed to be tougher than your horse. If your horse struggles, you carry more. That's considered fair. You do everything on horseback. You eat, fight, and even relieve yourself while riding. If you fall, you might get crushed. If you stop, you'll be left behind. Complain, and people will assume wolves got you. In the Mongol Empire, there are no roads and no fixed destinations, only survival and speed. And remember, walking is for prisoners. You're not one. At least, not yet. You've made it through the ride. You're alive, but now you're hungry. Sadly, breakfast here isn't exactly delicious. Someone hands you a leather bag. Inside, a sour, fizzy liquid sloshes. This is your morning drink, fermented mare's milk. It's white, smells weird, and tastes even worse. But you drink it anyway. It's called a rag. It burns a little going down, and that means it's working. Children drink it. Warriors drink it. Even grandmothers drink it. Now for food. Maybe someone gives you a piece of dried meat, probably mutton. It's tough, gray. It feels like chewing a boot. You chew it for 20 minutes. It doesn't get smaller, just wetter. You might also get a chunk of dried dairy, so hard it could be used as a rock. It tastes like sour dust and hurts your teeth, but you eat it anyway. Tears might come to your eyes, but they'll freeze before they fall. There are no tables, chairs, or napkins. You sit on the ground. Everything smells like someone is cooking something that used to have hooves. No one uses forks or spoons, just hands. Across from you, an old man eats quietly, ties a knot in his saddle rope, and sharpens a knife like it's a holy act. You don't ask what you're eating. That's a good way to stop getting food. Meals are fast and quiet. No chatting. Mongols eat like they ride, quick and ready to move. You try to match their speed, but fail. The meat is too tough. You're not full, but you're less hungry, and in this world, that's a success. As the sun climbs higher, the horses start sweating. So do you. You might wonder when it's time to clean up. But in the Mongol Empire, bathing isn't common. Clean doesn't mean using soap, it just means you haven't died of infection. Everyone smells like smoke, sweat, and animals. If you smell like flowers, people will think you're a spy or cursed, or both. Water is for drinking, not bathing. If you try to wash in a river, that's water others need to survive. If you want to die of infection with clean skin, go ahead, but don't expect sympathy. There's no soap, only animal fat, ash, and dust. Want to wash your face? Rub it with sand and pretend you're at a spa. Your hands are dirty. Your nails are sharp. Your hair hasn't seen water in months, but it's tied under your cap. Appearance matters, just not the clean kind. The greasy look is respected. Lice? You don't remove them. You live with them. You name them. You toss them into the fire during conversations. If they bite too much, you smear fat on yourself and dare them to continue. Your clothes are made of wool. They're stiff and old, stained with blood from a goat you barely remember. You don't change clothes. You just add more layers in winter and peel them off in summer. Underwear may not even exist. Neither does shame, your teeth, your problem. There are no toothbrushes. You chew bones. You drink sour milk and hope it cleans out your mouth. If a tooth goes bad, you pull it out with a knife. Hygiene is a luxury here. You get no bath, only wind and the smell of unwashed people. but no one else notices your scent over their own now that you've forgotten what soap is. It's time to go to your first battle. You ride all morning and into the afternoon. No one tells you where you're going, you just go. In the distance, you see riders coming, but they're not friendly. They're here to kill you or be killed. You don't panic. No one does. Everyone silently grabs their bow. Mongol bows are small, curved, and powerful. They're made from layers of horn, animal sinew, and raw strength. They're heavy and deadly. You notch your arrow. Your horse keeps moving, and you don't stop. Slowing down would be embarrassing. You twist your body, aim, and shoot. Your arrow flies, and so do theirs. This is Mongol war. There are no fancy sword fights or brave speeches, just arrows sharp, constant, deadly arrows. You ride and shoot without stopping. 3 enemies fall before you even blink. Others turn and flee. The trick is movement. Keep moving. The enemy gets close. You pretend to retreat. It's a trick. They chase you. Then you turn and shoot them in the face. It's a deadly dance, fast, silent, and brutal. You hear a scream, but you don't look back. Your arrows are poison, not for cruelty, but for strategy. While one enemy and his friends waste time, saving him, wound to, and their whole line slows down. You fire until your fingers hurt, and then you keep firing. If you stop, you'll die. By sunset, it's over. You don't count how many you've killed. No one does. All that matters is, you're still riding. There's no celebration. You wipe your weapon, eat, sleep, and prepare to do it all again tomorrow. The battle is over, and the sun is sinking behind the hills. There's no singing, no victory party, just the crackling of a fire and the sound of someone cutting up an animal nearby. It's time for dinner. In a Mongol world, you eat what? You kill. If you didn't kill anything today, don't worry, someone else did. But you still have to help prepare the food. That could mean skinning the animal, slicing it up, or even stabbing it again if it's still twitching. The meat is hard and chewy. That's normal. It came from an animal that lived climbing steep hills through snow. You roast it on a metal stick that's been used by your family for generations. There are no seasonings, no salt, and no rituals. If it's not bleeding anymore, it's ready. You sit in a circle with other warriors, all quietly chewing. Everyone stares into the fire, like they're waiting for it to pay them back. A fighter next to you finishes a rib, licks it clean, and tosses the bone over his shoulder like he expects it to grow into another goat. The fat is the best part, greasy, thick, and vital for survival. Mongols don't eat fat for flavor. They eat it because it keeps you alive in the freezing cold. You bite into it with the same energy you'd use to fight an enemy. There's no bread, no vegetables, just meat, milk products, and maybe a bowl of something that smells like it could be soup or regret. If someone gives you organ meat, you eat it. You don't ask what part of the animal it came from. Curiosity is a luxury you don't have. You are not a noble. You are not a guest. You are a stomach with legs and a knife. After eating, no one washes dishes. Bones go to the dogs. Ashes blow away in the wind. You wipe your greasy hands on your cloak, which also acts as your towel, blanket, and sometimes your tablecloth. Cleanliness is more of a theory here. Someone burps loudly. That's polite. You burp, too. Congratulations, you're fitting in. Later, you lie down next to your horse in a bed made of felt. You might dream about meat, because that's what tomorrow holds, too. And if it doesn't, you'll have to ride farther to find it. Winter arrives without warning. One night you take your boots off to sleep, and the next morning they're frozen solid. Welcome to the steppe winter. It's not just cold, it is cold. The kind that wraps around your bones and whispers, you shouldn't be here. The wind doesn't howl. It bites. It has sharp teeth and goes straight for your ears. Your breath becomes mist, then frost, then regret. You sleep right up against your horse, now not near your horse. With your horse, you press your back against its warm body. It's awkward, but it's better than freezing. Dressing for winter becomes a puzzle. Wool over wool, then leather, then fur. You stop feeling your fingers by midday. You stop feeling your toes the next day. If they come back, great. If not, fewer toes to stub. There are no forests, no firewood, only frozen animal dung. You burn it. It smells awful, but it's warm. The smoke stings your eyes. You blink and your eyelashes freeze together. Now you look like an ice sculpture. Your water is frozen. Your food is frozen. Your nose is bleeding. You ride anyway. The weather is not an excuse in the Mongol Empire. If it's not an arrow or a plague, it's not a big deal. You ride with snow in your boots and cold in your bones, and no one cares, especially not the horses, who actually seem to enjoy it. The cold changes you, it steals your voice, dries your skin, and makes you quiet and tough. You don't complain not because you're brave, but because your jaw is frozen still. You ride, because if you stop, you'll freeze to death, and if you freeze, someone will pile some rocks on your body and keep going. The Empire doesn't wait for spring, and neither can you. Your leader doesn't look like a hero. He sits cross-legged on a wooden platform, chewing dried meat like it's just another day. His coat is old, his beard messy, and his boots are stained with blood, maybe from a goat, maybe from a soldier, maybe from a tax collector. This is your Khan, your general, the man who can wipe out an entire city with just a nod. You don't talk unless spoken to. You don't stare. You definitely don't correct his pronunciation, even if he keeps calling you the one with the hair for 6 months straight. He speaks softly. Mongol leaders don't shout. If you can't hear him, that's your problem. Listen better. Or just follow the tone of his voice and the pounding of your own heart. His commands are short, clear, and final. Ride there. Burn that. Take their tribute. Kill the messenger. Don't come back until it's done. You nod. Everyone nods. Even the toughest warriors now like kids at school. One man coughs during the meeting. He's gone the next day. No one brings it up. Your Khan doesn't care about your feelings. He cares about results. Did the city fall? Did you bring back treasure? Are the horses fed? If the answer is no, you better be holding your own severed arm as an excuse. His tent isn't fancy, but it's full of maps. Dozens of them. Hand-drawn with notes that look like a bird wrote them with a claw. You don't understand any of them. He understands all of them. To him, rivers are roads, mountains are just bumps, and kingdoms are small prizes waiting to be unwrapped. You get your orders. You leave. No questions. No hanging around. You saddle up and ride into the cold again. Because in the Mongol Empire, leadership isn't about charm, it's about survival. And anyone who questions the Khan doesn't get a second chance. Today, you're not a soldier. You're a messenger. But that doesn't mean you're safe. You ride with a few guards and a flag of peace, but you know what's behind you. Thousands of warriors ready to burn a city if your message is ignored. The message is short and simple, written in Mongolian, Persian, maybe Chinese, depending on who you're giving it to. It says something like, submit or don't. We'll come back either way. It's sealed with wax, though it might as well be soaked in fuel. Considering, what happens if it's rejected? You ride into rich cities with golden roofs and silk curtains. Guards eye you nervously. You're fed. You're questioned. People look at you like you're a wolf in a dinner jacket. You stay polite, calm. You explain that accepting Mongol rule is the smart choice. The benefits include peace, trade, and fewer massacres. Refuse, and you'll get arrows, fire, and your buildings turn to dust. Sometimes they say yes. They offer gold, horses, and maybe daughters. You nod and leave. That city is safe for now. Sometimes they hesitate. They send you back with vague promises and expensive gifts. You take them, smile. But you remember everything, and sometimes they kill the messenger. That's a mistake. You are not avenged with complaints. You are avenged with catapults, warriors, and severed heads used as warning signs. In the Mongol Empire, diplomacy is fast. One letter, one chance. No debates. No second messages. You bring the will of the Khan. If it's ignored, the reply is 40,000 archers riding into town with siege gear. You don't argue. You deliver the message. If they listen, they live. You've reached the Mongol capital. You were expecting walls, palaces, and fancy people offering fruit. Instead, you see hundreds of yurts round tents spread out like mushrooms after a rain. No stone, no marble, just wool, smoke, and boiling stew. This is Karakorum, the heart of the empire. Stretching from Korea to Europe, it may look like a lost sheep camp, but it works. These yurts aren't simple. They're portable command centers. Each one can be packed up and moved in an hour. You can burn a castle. You can't burn what's already gone by sunrise. The Khan's yurt is bigger than the rest. Its door always faces south. You don't go in unless you're invited. Inside, it's warm, covered in felt and furs. There's a throne, not elegant, but solid. People come here from all over. Traders from Baghdad, princes from Kiev, spies from China. Everyone sits cross-legged, sipping fermented milk and pretending not to notice the woman cutting up a deer. With a spoon in the corner, there's no giant office building. No paperwork tower. Just a man with a sharp memory and a few terrified assistants using bone pens. Laws are spoken. Orders go out on horseback. Mistakes fatal. Still, the roads are safe. Trade is booming. There's no poverty because everyone works. You're either useful or you're riding out to find a way to be useful. This isn't Rome. This isn't Baghdad. This is Mongol civilization. Fast, tough, mobile. No statues, no marble. Just felt, fire, and the knowledge that the whole city could vanish tonight and pop up in another valley by morning. You're hungry, you're cold, and you spot a horse with no rider nearby. You think, just a quick ride, maybe a few miles. I'll bring it back. You grab the reins. But before you get far, you're caught. Now you're on your knees in front of a man with a mustache so sharp it could be a weapon. He isn't yelling. He isn't angry. He just points at the horse, then at you, then at a nearby fire rock. It looks perfect for an execution. You're about to learn something important. There are no jails in the Mongol Empire, no long court trials, no lawyers. Justice is quick and clear. If you steal, you repay double if you can. If not, they take something else, a finger, a hand, sometimes your head. Depends on what you took and how important it was. You try to explain, but Mongols don't like long stories. If you talk too much, they assume you're lying. So you keep your defense short, just 3 words. The elders listen. One spits, one shrugs, then they nod. Verdict, you live. Punishment, you walk. That means no more riding. The stolen horse is gone. You now walk behind the caravan on foot, with no idea when your honor will be restored. Maybe in a season, maybe longer. No one tells you. Mongols don't make speeches about forgiveness. They punish, then expect you to keep up. Murder is punished by death unless it was part of a family revenge. In that case, you owe the victim's family livestock, work, or even a wife, preferably all 3. Lying to a commander, death. Hurting another Mongol, death. Hurting a foreigner under Mongol protection, double death plus ceremony. But honesty, that's valued. Courage, respected. Generosity, honored. You might stink of sour milk and ride like a sack of potatoes. But if you keep your word and speak the truth, people will feed you. Mongol law is harsh, but fast. You always know where. You stand usually in front of someone with a sword. And if your conscience is clear, so are your hands mostly. The scouts return. They don't talk. They just point west. Smoke is rising in the distance. It's a city, big, walled. The kind that believes its guards and gates are strong enough to stop what's coming. That's cute. You ride out at dawn. Behind you are engineers with carts full of siege tools, ladders, ropes, axes, fire pots, even collapsible towers. Think of them as Mongol party supplies. There are no pep talks, no prayers, no war drums, just hand signals and the sound of 5,000 men getting ready to draw their bows. First, you circle the city. Always circle. You watch and observe. You spot a weak gate, a cracked wall, a tower that looks like it's barely standing. You whisper what you see to your captain. He grunts and scratches notes into the dirt with a dagger. Then comes the noise, screams, horns, fire. But still, you don't attack. You wait. Panic does your work for you. Inside the city, people trip over each other. Some try to hide their gold. Some try to bury their children. Every second they delay, your engineers get closer to the walls with their siege gear. Walls don't scare Mongols. They build siege towers using whatever is nearby: trees, rocks, even furniture from abandoned buildings. You don't carry machines. You carry knowledge and confidence. The archers rain down arrows like a thunderstorm. It's not a wave, it's a weather event. The sky turns black. Arrows hit with a deadly whisper. Then you charge. You don't hit the gate like a hammer, you hit it like wind with teeth. You pour through the opening, weapons drawn, horses foaming, your eyes narrowed not with anger, but calculation. This is not chaos, this is math. Every street you take is one step closer to the food. Storage, every alley is a move toward controlling supplies. You don't loot just for fun, you loot with a purpose. And when it's over, when the towers fall and the flags come down, you don't cheer, you count. Who gave up? Who resisted? Who's useful? Who's just extra weight? The rest are dealt with, quickly, quietly, by nightfall. The city is Mongol, and you're already preparing for tomorrow's mission. The battle is done. The banners are raised. The bodies lie still. The streets are quiet. filled with the silence of people who now know who rules them. You, the outsider on horseback, who helped run siege machines and now reviews tax laws, over a bowl of ghosts to die in the Mongol Empire. Conquest is not the end. It's just the beginning, the part where the paperwork starts. The locals peek out, from broken homes and burnt temples, expecting pain and chaos. But instead, they see a man in a fur coat holding a list of jobs. The Mongols don't destroy everything, only what fights back. The rest, it gets organized. If you're a blacksmith, you stay. If you weave cloth, welcome aboard. If you're a scholar, congrats. You now work for someone who doesn't read, but knows how many arrows it takes to burn a library. There's no fancy government. Just you, a few scribes, and a mountain of practical sense. You assign leaders, usually locals who know the language, and know how not to get stabbed when collecting taxes. The rules are simple. Obey the Khan. Pay your taxes. Don't start trouble. It might sound vague, but don't worry, punishment is not. You get one warning. After that, it's rope. Trade starts. Up again fast. Toll gates are manned by sundown. The market reopens the next morning, selling roasted fish like nothing happened. Commerce is sacred just behind horses. You don't force people to change their culture. You don't build statues. You just make sure the food is counted and the merchants keep moving. The Mongols don't care about identity, they care about results. You can keep your temples and customs, just don't rebel. Taxes are collected, population counts are done, and by the end of the week, the same people who screamed in fear are now relieved that the roads are safer. Yes, you conquered them, but you also improved delivery times. Now, you're riding west further than you've ever gone, past familiar cities, past the camps where your name was carved into yurts, past everything that felt known. This is the edge of the empire, the frontier. The air is thinner, the stories are thicker. Nobody gives you directions. Roads don't exist. You get a shrug toward the mountains or a vague point toward a smoky valley. The only real compass you have is the bones left behind by others. You ride past strange things, stone towers built by people no one remembers, abandoned forts left half-finished, trees with ribbons tied on their branches, gifts for forgotten gods. You stop at a ruined monastery. The doors are missing, but inside it's quiet. A monk bows and offers tea. He doesn't flinch as you stomp him with muddy boots. He knows what happens when people say no to you. Then come the whispers, ghost armies, cities that vanished overnight. A mountain pass where Khan's brother went missing and came back years later, never blinking again. You don't believe it all, but you ride slower anyway. At night. There's no fire, no laughter, just you, your horse, and the sound of wolves arguing about philosophy in the dark. You keep your cloak tight. Check your blade twice. Not for bandits, but for whatever made the locals build shrines in trees and never talk about it. Again, even your horse seems nervous. This is a horse that's eaten human flesh and napped through thunder, but now it twitches at shadows. There are no borders here, only feelings. The edge of the empire isn't marked by fences. It's marked by silence, confusion, and the soft fading of orders that were once loud. Here, the Khan's voice arrives late if at all. Still, you do your job. You scout. You observe. You return. You take notes on every weird village, every half-built temple, every sideways patch of grass. When you head back, you feel the weight of the empire behind you, heavy, brutal, real. The edge didn't swallow you. You made it back, maybe not as a hero, but in one piece. And that, in Mongol terms, is practically a miracle. Your horse is thinner. Your boots are bloody. You're missing a tooth or two, but your bag is full maps, names, reports, even a rough sketch of a castle that looked at you funny. You hand it all over. A scribe nods. A captain grunts. The empire moves on. Far away. Someday, someone in the quiet library will open one of your reports and frown. They won't understand the abbreviations. They'll say the numbers must be wrong. They'll call the Mongols savages, a horde, just arrows and horses with no order or reason. They'll forget the engineers, the laws, the diplomacy. They'll remember the fire, not the fact that you offered peace first, that you asked for surrender before flattening the city, that you offered safe trade and lower taxes. They'll draw you as a monster, not as the person who once spent 2 months arguing over water rights with a man who hadn't bathed in 10 years. They'll turn your careful plans into chaos, your discipline into madness, your smart conquests into random destruction, and they'll ignore the fact that their own kingdoms were falling apart long before you arrived with a torch and a plan. But you won't care. You weren't building a legend. You were building roads, real ones, making empires answer for their walls, making the world smaller, one hoofbeat at a time. Let's move to Europe now. We're in the mid-700s. A boy is born, probably around the year 742. His name is Charlemagne. We don't know exactly where he was born, maybe Ingelheim, maybe Aachen, maybe somewhere else. Back then, no one cared much about writing down birthplaces, even for future emperors. His father was Pepin the Short, a clever Frankish noble who made a bold political move. He got rid of a weak king named Childeric III and crowned himself king of the Franks. With the blessing of the Pope, that made Charlemagne the son of not just a king, but a man who had redefined what it meant to rule. Charlemagne didn't grow up chasing frogs in a meadow. He was trained from the start, trained to fight, to lead, and to think about religion. His education was not poetry and art, it was weapons, prayers, and how to survive nobles trying to stab you in your sleep. His tutor, maybe a man named Fulrad, was tough, not story time before bed, more like recite these Latin prayers or get smacked. We don't have a diary from young Charlemagne. His biographer, a man named Einhard, wrote about him like a fanboy, so we can't be sure of his personality. But we do know that Charlemagne stood out. He was over 6 feet tall in a time when 5 feet was above average, and he had a natural gift for leadership. When Pepin died in 768, Charlemagne was ready, but he didn't get the whole kingdom. His brother Carloman got half. That's how things were done in the medieval world, split the kingdom between sons, and hope they don't kill each other. Surprise, it didn't work. Carloman and Charlemagne didn't get along. Their kingdoms were supposed to be united, but it felt more like to rival gangs with crowns. Carloman was proud and difficult. Charlemagne was already showing signs of being a brilliant, ruthless leader. When a rebellion broke out in Aquitaine, Charlemagne went to handle it. Carloman refused to help. Classic little brother behavior, let big brother fight the battle and sulk when he wins. Then came Desiderius, king of the Lombards in Italy. He offered peace to Charlemagne through marriage. "Marry my daughter," he said. Charlemagne agreed. Carloman saw this as betrayal. Desiderius had once backed their father, and now Charlemagne was getting cozy with him. Drama alert. This was a medieval soap opera. But before things could get to ugly, Carloman died. Suddenly, in 771, at just 20 years old. Official cause of death, natural, but in medieval times, that could mean anything from illness to someone looking at him the wrong way. Charlemagne didn't. Wait. He marched into Carloman's land and took it. No debate. Carloman's wife and sons fled to guess who Desiderius, who was now angry. Now Charlemagne ruled all of Francia. No more sharing. Just one crown, one ruler, and a growing list of enemies. The first, his X-and-dash laws. After Carloman's death, Charlemagne had a problem in Italy. His former father-in-law, Desiderius, was not happy. Charlemagne had married his daughter, then dumped her after Carloman died. Awkward. Desiderius had taken in Carloman's widow and kids and was now backing their claim to the throne. That wasn't just annoying. That was war. In 773, Charlemagne crossed the Alps with his army. That wasn't a scenic hike. It was cold, dangerous, and full of deadly surprises. But Charlemagne didn't let mountains or bad weather stand in his way. He reached Pavia, the Lombard capital, and laid siege. Desiderius dug in, but Charlemagne was patient. He surrounded the city and waited. Months passed. Food ran out. Spirits dropped. By 774, Pavia surrendered. Charlemagne didn't install a puppet king. He crowned himself king of the Lombards. Just like that, he was now king of the Franks and the Lombards. A medieval power move so bold, it made waves all the way to Rome. Speaking of Rome, Pope Adrian I had been watching all of this nervously. Desiderius had threatened the Pope's lands. The Pope had hoped Charlemagne would help, and he did in return. The Pope gave Charlemagne his full support. That alliance between throne and church would last for decades. This wasn't just about defeating a rival. It was a message. Charlemagne wasn't playing small. He wasn't just a Frankish warlord. He was building an empire. Now that Italy was under control, Charlemagne turned his attention to the north, to Saxony. The Saxons were not peaceful nobles sipping wine. They were wild tribes, pagan, fierce, and they had no interest in Christianity or Frankish rule. They had been attacking the borders of the empire for years. Charlemagne had enough. In 772, He launched a campaign that would become his most brutal, the Saxon Wars. Not just one war, 18 separate campaigns over 30 years. Because the Saxons didn't give up at first. It seemed easy. Charlemagne rode into Saxony, chopped down their sacred tree, and declared, "You're Christians now." The Saxons nodded politely, then rebelled the moment he left. This kept happening. Charlemagne would invade, crush the rebellion, baptize everyone at sword point, and leave. The Saxons would destroy churches, kill priests, and go back to their old gods after a big rebellion in 782. Charlemagne responded with something terrible, the massacre of Verdun. Around 4,500 Saxons were executed in one day, even by medieval standards. It was horrifying. Charlemagne didn't just want obedience, he wanted faith. He truly believed it was his Christian duty to save souls, even if he had to do it with fire and steel. He sent monks with his armies. He built churches as fast as he built forts, and anyone who refused to be baptized, well, the baptismal font came with guards. But no matter how hard he tried, the Saxons wouldn't stay down. Their forests became graveyards for Frankish soldiers. The war dragged on and on, rebellion after rebellion, year after year. Still, Charlemagne wasn't just a warlord. He had a softer side, especially when it came to books. Yes, the man who crushed Saxons also started one of the most important educational movements in Europe, the Carolingian Renaissance. This wasn't about paintings or statues. It was about making sure people could actually read and write, especially the people running the empire. Charlemagne's empire was growing fast, but many priests, nobles, and officials were barely literate. Mistakes were everywhere, even in the Bible. So Charlemagne took action. He brought in top scholars from across Europe. The most famous, Alcuin of York, a serious man who probably treated bad Latin like a criminal offense. Under Alcuin's leadership, Charlemagne started palace schools, created teaching plans, and made monasteries into learning centers. He wanted everyone, priests, scribes, even farmers, to get a chance to learn. The focus was Latin, because if you couldn't read the Bible in Latin, what was the point? Ironically, Charlemagne himself couldn't read very well. He could speak many languages, but struggled with writing. He tried, though. Stories say he kept wax tablets by his beds where he could practice. Still, he valued knowledge. He respected teachers. He even made handwriting better. Yes, the clean writing style we call Carolingian minuscule came from him. Before that, books looked like someone spilled ink while shaking. Thanks to his reforms, ancient texts were copied and saved. Monks worked tirelessly, knowing their lives could depend on their penmanship. Literacy improved. The church got better organized, and Europe took its first steps out of the Dark Ages. Then came Christmas Day, 800 AD in Rome. At St. Peter's Church, Charlemagne was there, attending Mass like a good king. Suddenly, surprise, Pope Leo III walked up, put a golden crown on his head, and declared him Emperor of the Romans. No warning, no asking, just boom, new title. Some think Charlemagne knew. Others say he was caught off guard. Charlemagne later claimed he wouldn't have gone to church that day if he knew it would happen. That's a very emperor-like thing to say. Either way, it was huge. The Roman Empire had fallen in 476. Now, over 300 years later, the Pope brought it back with Charlemagne as its ruler. A Germanic king, crowned by the Pope, now ruled a massive patchwork of tribes and nobles. The Holy Roman Empire had begun, though it wouldn't be called that yet. But not everyone was happy. The Byzantines and Constantinople had called themselves Roman emperors for centuries. They didn't like a Frankish king claiming the same title. There was tension, angry letters, awkward treaties. But in Western Europe, the title stuck. Charlemagne ruled as emperor until his death in 814. That title gave power to everything he did, from making laws to fixing churches. It was the perfect ending to a powerful life. He had conquered most of Europe, but his real achievement, keeping it together. Conquering half of Europe is impressive, but keeping it from falling apart, that's the real challenge. Charlemagne didn't just win wars, he figured out how to run a giant empire. And surprisingly, he didn't do it with just swords and shouting. He used rules, messengers, and some very clever organization. Once Charlemagne became emperor, he got serious about management. He knew he couldn't be everywhere at once, so he created a system that was kind of like an early version of modern government, but with more Latin and fewer excuses. At the heart of his plan were the Missi Dominici, That means the Lord's messengers. These were trusted teams, usually one noble and one bishop who traveled all around the empire. Their job, deliver Charlemagne's orders, check on local leaders, and make sure nobody was secretly trying to become a king in their backyard. Think of them like medieval inspectors or auditors, but with swords and holy approval, local counts. And dukes still had power, but they answered to Charlemagne. If they didn't, the Missi Dominici would show up with a few pointed questions and possibly an army. Charlemagne also started writing down laws. These were called capitularies rules that applied across the empire. They covered everything: how monasteries should run, how many soldiers nobles had to send, and even what kind of bread could be served at a feast. Yes, he had rules for bread, because he knew a bad loaf could ruin everything. But Charlemagne wasn't a control freak just for fun. He believed a peaceful, organized empire showed God's favor. His rules weren't just legal, they were moral. He wanted everyone to know their role, pay their taxes both to the church and to him, and say their prayers ideally under a roof he had approved. Of course, the system wasn't perfect. There was still some corruption. Messages took a long time to travel, and sometimes local leaders just ignored orders when no one was watching. But overall, it worked, especially for an empire that stretched from Spain to Germany to Italy and beyond. By the early 800s, Charlemagne ruled more land than anyone in Europe had since the Roman Empire. His empire covered many modern countries: France, Germany, parts of Italy, the Low Countries, and more. It included Christians, pagans, half-converted tribes, proud nobles, and powerful bishops. Somehow, he kept it all under control. On the surface, everything looked amazing. His revival of learning, the Carolingian Renaissance, was thriving. Monks were copying books like their lives depended on it, and sometimes they did. Laws were more organized. Even the coins had his face on them, glaring in profile. Nothing says I'm the boss like putting your face in everyone's pockets. But below the surface, cracks were forming. One big problem was succession. Charlemagne had a lot of children, at least 18, from different wives and concubines, but only a few of them were seen as fit to rule. At first, he split the empire among 3 sons, just like his father had done. But then one son died, then another. By 806, he was down to one, Louis the Pious. Louis was the youngest, and he was kind, thoughtful, and very religious. Basically, the opposite of Charlemagne. Louis liked praying more than fighting. He was a good man, but maybe not the best choice for holding a massive empire together, especially one built on fear and force. Meanwhile, the nobility, the powerful landowners, were growing more confident. During Charlemagne's rule, they stayed in line because they feared him, but even then, some of them only followed the rules when someone was watching. As Charlemagne got older, the local lords started thinking bigger. They began acting like mini kings in their regions. Another challenge was the cost of running such a huge empire. Wars were expensive. Rebellions were common. The Saxons still weren't totally quiet, and keeping roads, armies, and churches going cost a lot of resources. Even the church, which had supported Charlemagne for years, had its own goals. Bishops controlled large lands and often had more power than local rulers. They supported Charlemagne, yes, but only when it didn't clash with their interests. The empire worked because of Charlemagne, his strength, his presence, his systems. But it had very few backup plans. The whole thing depended on one man, and that man was getting old. In the winter of 814, Charlemagne became sick. He was at his favorite palace city, Aachen. The air smelled of burning firewood and ink from the many scrolls nearby. He was 72 years old, an incredible age for someone who had spent decades riding into war and ruling a vast empire. His decline wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. He fasted. He prayed. His biographer, Einhard, said he accepted death calmly like a true Christian emperor. On January 28, 814, Charlemagne died. Bells rang across the land. The empire paused. People held their breath. He was buried in Aachen Cathedral, seated on a marble throne, wearing imperial robes, with a sword at his side and a Bible in his lap. A legendary send-off for a legendary ruler. Later stories claimed he sat upright in his tomb, ready to return if the empire ever needed him. That's probably not true, but it tells you how powerful his legend became. His only surviving son, Louis the Pious, now had the empire and all its problems. Louis tried hard to rule well. He really did, but he wasn't his father. He was too gentle, to quiet. The tough grip loosened. The powerful nobles began to push back. Rebellion started. Family fights broke out. Soon, civil wars followed. Within a few decades, the massive empire Charlemagne built had been split into smaller parts. Eventually, it became what we now know as France, Germany, and other European countries. But Charlemagne's legend didn't die with the empire. In fact, it grew even bigger. He became a symbol of perfect Christian king. Popes invoked his name. Emperors tried to copy his image. The Holy Roman Empire, which rose later, claimed him as their spiritual founder. Even centuries later, people like Napoleon tried to link themselves to Charlemagne. When Napoleon crowned himself, he made sure everyone knew it was just like what happened to Charlemagne. Why? Because Charlemagne wasn't just a king. He was a blueprint, a model. He mixed Roman law, Germanic strength, and Christian belief into something Europe had never seen before. He helped pull a broken continent out of the darkness and gave it direction. When he died, the world lost a man but gained a legend. And legends, as history shows us again and again, are very hard to bury. Charlemagne ruled a massive empire, but most people in it weren't kings or nobles. They were peasants, ordinary folks living in small villages, farming the land, raising animals, and trying not to freeze in winter or starve in summer. Let's take a closer look at what life was like for them. A typical peasant lived in a wooden house with a straw roof. The floor was just dirt. In the middle of the house was a fire for cooking and warmth. There was no chimney, so smoke filled the room. People lived with their animals, chickens, pigs, maybe a goat inside the house. Why? Because animals were valuable, and also because they gave off heat in winter, smelly, but warm. Peasant life was ruled by the seasons. In spring, they planted crops like barley, wheat, and rye. In summer, they worked from sunrise to sunset, weeding and tending their fields. In autumn, they harvested. In winter, they tried to survive. They preserved food by drying or salting it. But often, by February, their supplies were running low. Hunger was common. Some winters, people starved. There was no such thing as weekends. Every day was work unless it was a church holiday, and there were many of those. People didn't take vacations. They didn't travel far. Most never left the area where they were born. Education? Not for peasants. Most couldn't read or write. Their knowledge was passed down through stories, songs, and practical teaching: how to plant, how to butcher, how to make clothes. And they weren't free. Many were serfs tied to the land. They didn't own their farms. A local lord or noble did. Serfs worked that land in exchange for protection. If their village was attacked, the lord's knights would defend it. But in return, peasants gave part of their crops, animals. A labor diet wasn't slavery, but it was close. Serfs couldn't leave without permission. They couldn't own weapons. They had no say in government. And if their lord was cruel, they had no real way to fight back. Still, some parts of peasant life were joyful. Families gathered at night to share stories. Music and dancing were common during festivals. People brewed beer, baked bread, and celebrated births and marriages with whatever they had. They found ways to laugh, even when life was hard. Religion was the center of their lives. The village church wasn't just for prayer, it was also where people met, got news, and marked important events. Baptisms, marriages, funerals, everything happened there. Most people believed deeply in heaven and hell. They feared God and wanted salvation. But they didn't read the Bible, it was in Latin, and they couldn't read anyway. Instead, priests taught them through sermons and images. Church walls were covered in paintings showing heaven above and hell below. Angels helped the good, devils tortured the wicked. These pictures were like comic books for the illiterate, powerful, simple, and unforgettable. Priests were important but not always holy. Some were kind and wise. Others were lazy, greedy, or even violent. Some broke their vows and lived with women or drank too much. Charlemagne tried to fix this. He made rules for clergy and set up schools for them. But with thousands of churches and only a few inspectors, not every priest followed the rules. Still, the church gave people hope. It offered explanations for suffering, comfort during loss, and meaning in a world full of hardship. Faith was more than a belief, it was a way to survive. If you were a noble, life was very different. You lived in a manor or a castle. You had servants. You wore linen and wool, not rags. You ate meat regularly: boar, venison, chicken, even swan if you were really rich. Your life revolved around land. Nobles didn't run businesses, they owned estates. Peasants worked for them. The more land a noble had, the more power and wealth they held, and of course, the more knights they could summon in a war. Boys from noble families trained to become knights. From age 7, they learned to ride horses, handle weapons, and obey their elders. At 14, they became squires' helpers to real knights. They polished armor, held shields, and learned about battle. By 21, if they proved brave and loyal, they were knighted. Knights weren't just soldiers. They were part of the noble class. They followed a code of chivalry, a mix of bravery, loyalty, honor, and respect for women. At least, that was the ideal. In real life, some knights robbed travelers and bullied peasants. Not every knight was a hero. Noble women had limited choices. If they didn't marry, they joined a convent. Marriage wasn't about love, it was about alliances and land. A woman might be married off at 12 or 13 to a much older man. Her job was to have children, run the household, and support her husband. Some noble women were powerful and smart, running estates while their husbands went to war. But they still lived under strict rules and had fewer rights than men. Daily life for nobles wasn't all dancing and feasting. Running an estate took work. You had to settle disputes, manage resources, keep accounts, and prepare for war or famine. And nobles had their own worries, rebellious vassals, rival families, or angry kings still. Compared to peasants, nobles lived in luxury. They ate better, slept better, dressed better, and lived longer. Charlemagne's empire was a mix of all these layers: peasants, nobles, clergy, soldiers, scholars. Holding them all together was no small task, but the system worked for a while. Trade was limited but growing. Markets popped up near castles and churches. Merchants sold cloth, salt, wine, and tools. Traveling was risky. Bandits and bad roads, but some took the chance. Coinage improved. Charlemagne standardized weights and measures. He wanted fair trade and stable money. It didn't always work, but it was better than chaos. Towns were small. Most people still lived in villages, but a few cities, like Aachen, became cultural centers. There were schools, libraries, and churches where scholars copied books and taught reading. This was the start of something big. It wasn't a golden age, but it was a spark of light in a Europe that had been dark for centuries after Rome's fall. Charlemagne's empire showed that order, education, and faith could work together. His rule didn't erase poverty or violence, but it built something that lasted in memory. The idea that Europe could be united under one law, one faith, one ruler. That idea would inspire kings, emperors, and even popes for centuries. They'd remember the bearded giant who rode into battle and into legend, bringing light to a dark world. Charlemagne died in 814, and his son Louis the Pious took the throne. Louis was kind and religious, but he wasn't a strong leader like his father. He wanted peace and order, but what he got was confusion and rebellion. Louis had sons of his own, and like many rulers before him, he tried to divide the empire among them. At first, it seemed fair, but his sons didn't want to share. They wanted everything. Soon, the empire that Charlemagne built with strength and hard work began to fall apart. After Louis died, his sons Lothair, Louis the German, and Charles the Bald fought each other in a terrible civil war. Brothers turned against brothers. Armies clashed. Cities burned. This war tore the empire into pieces. In 843, the fighting ended with a treaty called the Treaty of Verdun. The empire was divided into 3 parts. Lothair got the middle part, called Middle Francia, which stretched from the North Sea down through Italy. Louis the German got the eastern part, which would later become Germany. Charles the Bald got the western part, which would become France. The dream of one united Christian empire was gone. Now there were 3 kingdoms, each with its own rules, problems, and rivals, and each one was weaker than what Charlemagne had left behind. As the empire split, danger returned. From the north came the Vikings, fierce warriors from Scandinavia. They came in fast ships, attacked villages, looted churches, and burned towns. The Franks had no navy, so they couldn't stop them. Viking raids became a constant fear. From the east came the Magyars, a horse-riding people from the Hungarian plains. They raided the eastern parts of the empire, taking prisoners and treasure. From the south came the Muslims, who attacked from bases in Spain and North Africa. They raided the Mediterranean coast, capturing slaves and destroying towns. With the empire divided and under attack, local leaders began to take more power. Nobles and lords built castles, raised their own armies, and protected their land. In return, peasants gave them loyalty, food, and labor. This system became known as feudalism. In feudalism, The king was still the highest lord, but real power was in the hands of local nobles. They ruled their own lands like mini-kings. They could collect taxes, hold courts, and fight wars. Peasants lived on their land and worked for them. In return, they got protection. It was a hard life, but it was safer than trying to survive alone. This system shaped Europe for centuries. It wasn't planned. It just happened because people needed safety, order, and someone to turn to when danger came. Even though the empire fell apart, Charlemagne's legacy lived on. People remembered him as a great king, a warrior, a builder, a Christian ruler who brought peace and learning. He became a legend, almost like a saint, even though he was never officially made one. The Holy Roman Empire, founded later in 962 by Otto the Great, claimed to follow in Charlemagne's footsteps. Its rulers called themselves emperors of the Romans and used the title to try to control Central Europe. But their empire was very different. It was a patchwork of kingdoms and cities, not one united land. Still, the name Roman Emperor had power, and every emperor wanted to be seen as another Charlemagne. The church also remembered Charlemagne. He had protected the Pope, defended Christianity, and helped spread the faith. He was often shown in paintings and stories as a wise and just king. In time, Charlemagne became a symbol of order, learning, and Christian rule. Even in the chaos that followed his death, people looked back and asked, what would Charlemagne do? His palace at Aachen became a holy place. His throne, his sword, and even his bones were treated like treasures. Later kings and emperors came to Aachen to be crowned, hoping some of his greatness would rub off on them. And what about education? Charlemagne's push for learning helped save many old books from being lost. Monks in his empire copied Latin text, history, science, religion into new books. Without them, much of the knowledge from ancient Rome and Greece might have disappeared. The writing style they used, Carolingian minuscule, was easy to read. It became the basis for modern European handwriting. So the next time you read clear, printed letters in a book, thank Charlemagne. He also helped shape modern Europe's borders. The division of his empire led to the rise of France, Germany, and Italy. The ideas of strong kings, Christian unity, and Western law all trace back, in part, to his reign. But maybe Charlemagne's biggest legacy was the idea that Europe could be more than tribes and chaos. That it could be one people, one faith, under one rule. That dream would return again and again in the Crusades, in the Renaissance, and even in modern European politics. Was Charlemagne perfect? No. He waged brutal wars, forced people to convert, and used violence to keep power. But he also brought peace, learning, and a sense of order to a broken world. He showed that even in dark times, one person could make a huge difference, and that's why, more than 1,100 years later, we still remember him not just as a king, but as a founder, a warrior emperor who lit a torch in the darkness and dared the world to follow it.